My name is Alex, and this happened about 4 years ago when I had just moved to Chicago for my first real job out of college. I was 22, broke, and desperate to find a place before the brutal Midwest winter set in. I ended up finding a studio apartment in a building called the Kensington Arms. It was one of those pre-war buildings, brick, drafty, and showing its age, but the rent was suspiciously cheap for the location. When I toured the place, the landlord, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson, didn't try to upsell it. He actually seemed hesitant. He told me flat out that the previous tenant, a guy about my age named Michael, had committed suicide in the apartment the previous Christmas Eve. At the time, I was a total skeptic. I didn't believe in ghosts or residual energy. To me, a tragedy was just a tragedy, not a haunting. I needed a roof over my head, so I signed the lease and moved in that same week. The first few weeks were painfully normal. I spent my time unpacking, working late, and trying to ignore the sounds of the old radiator clanking in the corner. The apartment was quiet, perhaps too quiet, but I chalked that up to the thick walls of older construction. I actually started to feel comfortable. Then, December hit. The weirdness didn't start with anything dramatic. It started with a package. I came home from work on December 12th to find a small red gift box sitting on my doormat. It wasn't wrapped professionally. The paper was crinkled and the tape was messy. There was no name tag, just black markers scrawled directly onto the wrapping paper. Almost time. I assumed it was a prank from a neighbor or a package delivered to the wrong floor. I brought it inside and opened it. The box was empty. Literally nothing but tissue paper. I threw it in the trash, feeling a bit annoyed but not scared. I figured it was just city living. People are weird. 3 days later, things escalated. I was washing dishes around 9 p.m. when I heard a sound from the living area behind me. It was a distinct, sharp scrape, like wood dragging against wood. I froze, turning off the faucet to listen. My apartment was a studio, so I could see everything. My small dining table was in the center of the room with 2 wooden chairs. One of the chairs was pulled out, slightly angled away from the table. I could have sworn I pushed them both in before I started doing the dishes. I walked over, my heart beating a little faster, and pushed the chair back in. Old floors, I muttered to myself, vibrations from the train. I was trying to rationalize it, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The air felt heavy, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees in seconds. I checked the thermostat. It was still set to 70, but I could see my breath misting in the air. On December 20th, I came home to find another red gift box. This one was sitting on my kitchen counter. I live alone. I have the only key, and I always lock my deadbolt. A cold wave of nausea hit my stomach. This wasn't a prank anymore. This was a break-in. I grabbed a kitchen knife, checked the closet and the bathroom, but the apartment was empty. Trembling, I approached the box. The writing on this one was jagged, pressed so hard the marker had torn the paper. I need it back. I cut the tape. Inside was a single frayed piece of thick rope. It looked old, stained with something dark that I didn't want to identify. I called the police. They came, took a report, but since there was no sign of forced entry and nothing was stolen, they basically told me to change my locks. I did, that very night. But it didn't make me feel safe. That night, I slept with the lights on, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. The climax happened on Christmas Eve. I had planned to go to my parents' house in Ohio, but a massive blizzard had grounded all flights and made the roads impossible. I was trapped in the apartment. I tried to distract myself with Netflix, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It's that primal gut instinct that tells you you're not alone. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted into a restless sleep on my mattress, which I had dragged into the furthest corner of the room. I woke up at exactly 3:14 a.m. The apartment was dead silent, except for the wind howling outside. But then, I heard it. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was the sound of the dining chair being dragged across the floor, but this time it was rhythmic, deliberate. I was paralyzed. I lay there staring into the darkness of the main room, my eyes adjusting to the faint amber light coming from the street lamps outside. I saw the silhouette. Someone was standing in the middle of my living room. They were standing on the chair. The figure was tall and lanky. I watched in horror as the figure seemed to be adjusting something above their head, near the ceiling fan. The silence was broken by a sound that haunts me to this day. A wet, wheezing sound, like air trying to escape a crushed windpipe. Then, the figure stopped moving. It slowly turned its head, not towards me, but towards the door. Suddenly, the chair was kicked out from under the figure with a violence that shook the floor. Bang! I screamed and scrambled for the light switch. The bulb flickered on, flooding the room with harsh, yellow light. The room was empty. There was no body hanging from the fan, no intruder. But the dining chair was on its L. It was toppled over in the middle of the room, exactly where I had seen the figure standing. And sitting on the table, perfectly centered, was a third red gift box. I didn't open it. I didn't even put on my coat. I grabbed my car keys and wallet, ran out of the apartment, and drove through the blizzard to a 24-hour diner 3 towns over. I stayed there until sunrise. I never spent another night in that apartment. I hired movers to get my stuff and broke my lease. But before I left the city for good, I did something I should have done at the start. I went to the library and looked up the obituary and police report for Michael, the previous tenant. The report confirmed he had committed suicide on Christmas Eve, but there was a detail in the coroner's notes that made my blood run cold. Michael had been found hanging from the ceiling fan, but the police were baffled by one detail. The ceilings in the apartment were 10 feet high. Michael was 5'8". There was no chair, no ladder, and no stool found anywhere in the apartment. The room was completely empty of furniture when they found him. It was physically impossible for him to have reached the ceiling on his own. The police ruled it a suicide, assuming someone had removed the chair before they arrived, though they never found a suspect. But I know what happened. I finally opened that last red box while I was packing my car to leave. Inside was a Polaroid photo. It was grainy and dark, taken from the corner of my living room. It showed me sleeping in my bed, and written on the back in that same jagged marker were the words, "Thanks for the chair." I don't know who or what is in that apartment, but sometimes when I'm sitting alone in my new house and I hear a chair scrape against the floor, I still freeze. My name is James, and this story takes place about 5 years ago, back in 2018. I had just finished my university degree in London, and having no immediate job prospects, I agreed to spend the summer helping my grandmother, Eleanor, prepare her old farmhouse in the countryside of Devon for sale. The house was one of those sprawling Victorian-era builds, beautiful on the outside, but inside, it felt like it was holding its breath. It was isolated, surrounded by miles of rolling hills and dense patches of woods, with the nearest neighbor being a good 10-minute drive away. When I arrived, everything seemed normal. My grandmother was frail but sharp-witted, and we spent the first few days sorting through boxes of old books and china. But there was one part of the house that I instinctively hated from the moment I stepped inside. The upstairs hallway. It was a long, narrow corridor that connected the bedrooms to the main bathroom. About halfway down between the door to my room and the linen closet, there was a section of the wall that my grandmother simply called the damp patch. But it wasn't just damp. It was a dead spot. Even at noon, with the sun blazing through the landing window, that 5-foot stretch of hallway remained in a perpetual grayish twilight. It was freezing cold, always about 10 degrees lower than the rest of the house, and the silence there was heavy. You know that pressure you feel in your ears when you dive to the bottom of a deep pool? That's what it felt like to walk through it. The first week, I tried to ignore it. I'm a rational guy. I told myself it was just poor insulation and bad lighting. I even tried to fix the light fixture in that section of the hall. I bought a high-wattage LED bulb, screwed it in, and flipped the switch. It flashed once, a bright, blinding white, and then shattered with a loud pop, raining glass onto the carpet. I didn't try to replace it again. The weirdness started with the sounds. My room was the guest bedroom closest to the dead spot. At night, usually around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., I would wake up to the sound of soft, rhythmic thumping. It sounded like a child bouncing a rubber ball against the wall, right in that dark section of the corridor. Thump, catch. Thump, catch. I'd lie there, frozen, listening to it for 20 minutes at a time. The first time I gathered the courage to open my door and check, the hallway was empty. The sound stopped the second my hand touched the doorknob. But the atmosphere was suffocating. The air in the hallway smelled distinct. Not like old house dust, but like ozone. Like the smell of the air right before a massive thunderstorm hits. Things escalated in the third week. My grandmother had a golden retriever named Buster. He was the friendliest, dumbest dog you'd ever meet. But Buster would not go upstairs. If you tried to drag him, he would whine and pee on the floor. One afternoon, I was painting the window frames in my room. I had left the door open for ventilation. I heard Buster's claws clicking on the hardwood stairs. I thought maybe he was finally getting brave. I heard him reach the landing. Then he stopped. A low guttural growl started, a sound I'd never heard him make. It was predatory. I put down my paintbrush and walked to the doorway. Buster was standing at the top of the stairs, every hair on his back standing straight up. He was staring directly at the dead spot in the hallway. He wasn't growling at a wall. He was growling at something. His eyes were fixed on empty space, tracking movement. His head moved slowly from left to right, as if watching someone pace back and forth in the darkness. "Buster?" I called out. He didn't even acknowledge me. He let out a sharp yelp, turned tail, and scrambled down the stairs so fast he nearly tripped. When I looked back at the dead spot, for a split second, I saw the shadows distort. It wasn't a figure exactly. It looked like the darkness itself was boiling, shifting like oil on water. I told my grandmother about it that night over tea. She didn't look surprised. She just took a sip of her Earl Grey and said, "The house has memories, James. Some of them just stick harder than others. Best to leave that hallway be at night." I should have listened. 2 nights before I was set to leave, a massive storm rolled in. The power went out around 10 p.m., plunging the farmhouse into absolute blackness. My grandmother had already gone to sleep in the master bedroom at the far end of the hall. I was lying in bed, wide awake, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. The silence of the house was deafening. Then, I heard it. Not the ball bouncing this time, breathing. It was loud, wet, and ragged. And it was coming from right outside my bedroom door. My first thought was that my grandmother was having a medical emergency. Maybe she had fallen in the hallway. Panic overrode my fear. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and ripped the door open. "Grandma!" I shouted. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness. Standing in the dead spot was a figure. It was wearing my grandmother's floral nightgown. It had her gray, messy hair. It was the same height as her, but it was facing the wall. Its nose was literally touching the peeling wallpaper, standing rigid and straight as a board. "Grandma?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Are you okay? The power's out." The figure didn't move. The wet breathing stopped instantly. Then, from the master bedroom at the end of the hall, behind the figure, I heard a groggy, confused voice call out. "James? Is that you? Why are you shouting, dear?" My blood turned to ice. My stomach dropped so hard I almost vomited. If my grandmother was in her room, then who was standing 5 feet away from me in her clothes? As if hearing my internal realization, the figure in the dead spot began to turn around. It moved jerkily, like a stop-motion animation puppet. I didn't wait to see its face. I didn't want to know what was under that gray hair. I slammed my bedroom door, locked it, and shoved my heavy dresser in front of it. I sat on my bed with my back against the headboard, clutching a cricket bat I kept in the room, staring at the door handle. I watched the handle for hours. Around 3 a.m., the handle slowly, silently turned all the way down, then up, then down again. A soft, familiar voice came from the other side. It wasn't a demonic growl. It was a perfect imitation of my own voice. "Let me in, James. It's dark out here." I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I waited until the sun came up, and I heard the birds singing. When I finally moved the dresser and opened the door, the hallway was empty. The dead spot was just a shadow again. I packed my bag in 5 minutes, told my grandmother I had a family emergency back in London, and drove off. I didn't care that I was leaving her there. I just needed to get away. The house sold 2 months later to a young couple. I never told them. I never told my grandmother either. She moved into a care home shortly after. But here is the part that keeps me up at night. Last week, I visited my grandmother at her care home. Her dementia has been getting worse lately, and she often confuses the past and present. We were talking about the old house, and she smiled, a distant look in her eyes. "You know, James," she said, patting my hand, "I miss that old hallway. I miss the other boy." I froze. "What other boy, Grandma?" "The one who used to stand outside your door and guard you while you slept," she whispered, smiling sweetly. "He had such long fingers. He was always so hungry." I haven't slept with the lights off since. My name is David, and this story takes place in the winter of 2016. I was 24 at the time, working as a freelance graphic designer. I had just gone through a pretty rough breakup and needed to get away from Boston for a while to clear my head and focus on a deadline. I found a listing online for a rental property in Sandy Point, Maine. It was a 2-story colonial house built sometime in the late 1800s, sitting on a cliff overlooking the Penobscot River. The rent was incredibly low for the size of the place, mostly because it was the dead of winter and the town was essentially a ghost town until tourist season. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The isolation was exactly what I wanted. The nearest neighbor was a mile down the road, and the silence was only broken by the wind whipping off the water. The house itself was drafty and smelled faintly of sea salt and old cedar wood, but it was clean. The first 3 days were uneventful. I worked, drank coffee, and slept. But on the fourth day, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It started with my laundry. I had done a load of wash that morning and left a pile of folded clothes on the dining room table before heading out to grab groceries in Bucksport. When I came back 2 hours later, I noticed something odd. My heavy red flannel shirt, the one I distinctly remember folding and placing on top of the stack, was gone. I looked around the room confused. I found it in the hallway, crumpled in a heap near the bottom of the stairs. At the time, I rationalized it immediately. The house is old, I thought. Must be a draft from the window. It blew off the table. It was a weak explanation considering the shirt was heavy wool, but my brain refused to accept anything else. I picked it up, tossed it back on the pile, and went about my day. That night, around 2:45 a.m., I woke up. I'm a light sleeper, and something had pulled me out of a dream. I lay there in the dark, listening. The house was settling, making those popping and groaning sounds old wood makes in the cold. But then, I heard a sound that didn't fit. Swish, swish. It sounded like fabric rubbing against fabric. It was soft, rhythmic, and coming from the hallway right outside my bedroom door. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I grabbed my phone and shone the flashlight at the crack under the door. Nothing. No shadows. The sound stopped instantly. I told myself it was a mouse or maybe a squirrel in the walls. I eventually fell back asleep, but the quality of the silence in the house had changed. It felt heavy, watchful. 2 days later, the escalation began. I woke up on a Sunday morning and walked into the bathroom to brush my teeth. I froze in the doorway. My winter boots, which I always left by the front door downstairs, were standing in the middle of the bathtub. They were placed perfectly side by side, facing the drain. A cold prickle of fear ran down my neck. This wasn't a draft. This wasn't a squirrel. Someone or something had physically carried my heavy boots up the stairs and placed them there while I slept. I checked every window, locked. I checked the back door, deadbolted. I even went into the basement, shining my flashlight into the dark corners, but found nothing but dust and cobwebs. I started to feel that creeping paranoia, the kind that makes you constantly look over your shoulder. I decided to leave the next morning. I couldn't handle another night. I spent the day packing. By 6 p.m., the sun had set, and the house was pitch black. I was in the kitchen making a final sandwich when I realized I had left my favorite hoodie in the living room. I walked out of the kitchen and into the hallway. The living room was to my right. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. I looked into the living room and stopped dead. My blood ran cold. Someone was sitting in the armchair by the window. I could see the silhouette clearly. They were wearing my jeans, my spare winter coat, and my beanie. They were sitting perfectly still, facing the window, looking out at the dark ocean. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I'm calling the police." The figure didn't move. It didn't flinch. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall and flicked it on. I gasped. It wasn't a person. It was just my clothes. My jeans were stuffed with throw pillows from the couch to give them the shape of legs. My coat was draped over the back of the chair, puffed out with a blanket. The beanie was perched on top of the headrest. It was arranged meticulously to look like a person sitting there. I stood there, staring at this grotesque effigy of myself, trying to process the level of insanity required to do this. Then, from the corner of the room, directly behind me, I heard it. A sharp intake of breath. It wasn't coming from the chair. It was coming from the coat closet I had just walked past. I didn't turn around. I didn't investigate. My fight or flight instinct kicked in, and I chose flight. I bolted for the front door, unlocked it with shaking hands, and sprinted to my car. I didn't even put on my shoes. I ran through the snow in my socks. I drove to the nearest police station, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. The police searched the house an hour later. They found no one. But here is the part that ensures I never sleep with the lights off anymore. When the officers did a sweep of the attic, they found a small hidden crawl space behind a false panel in the insulation. Inside, they found a sleeping bag, a few candy wrappers, and a peephole that had been drilled through the floorboards. The peephole looked directly down into my bedroom. But the most disturbing detail wasn't the nest. It was what they found next to the sleeping bag. It was a notebook, and on every single page, written in frantic, scratching handwriting, was a log of my daily routine. 8 a.m., he wakes up, wearing blue shirt. 12:30 p.m., he eats lunch, sandwich. 10 p.m., he sleeps on his side. And the final entry, written presumably minutes before I found the clothes in the chair. 6:15 p.m. He looks so good in my outfit. I wonder if I can wear his skin next. They never found the person who was living in my walls. But sometimes, when I'm walking down a busy street and I see someone wearing a red flannel shirt just like the one I lost, I can't help but wonder if he's still wearing my clothes, watching me, waiting for the right moment to upgrade. My name is Ryan, and this series of events took place in the fall of 2018. I was a sophomore at a university in Oregon, living with my two best friends, Tyler and Sarah. We were all broke students, so when we found a listing for a 3-bedroom house just off campus for a ridiculously low price, we didn't ask too many questions. The first house, let's call it the Burnside House, was an old craftsman-style bungalow. It had character, sure, but it also had that distinct old house smell, a mix of damp wood and something metallic, like stale copper. The first month was great. We threw a housewarming party, set up our gaming consoles, and settled into a routine. But slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. It didn't start with ghosts or monsters. It started with the temperature. No matter how high we cranked the thermostat, the hallway connecting our bedrooms was always freezing. I'm talking about seeing your breath cold. We complained to the landlord, but he just said the insulation was old. We learned to live with it, wearing hoodies inside. Then came the knocking. It started around mid-October. I was studying late one night around 2 a.m. when I heard 3 distinct knocks on my bedroom door. Knock, knock, knock. It was polite, almost rhythmic. I assumed it was Sarah asking for a charger or Tyler wanting to hang out. I yelled, "Come in." Nothing happened. The door didn't open. I got up, opened the door, and looked into the hallway. It was pitch black and empty. Both Sarah and Tyler's doors were shut, and I could hear Tyler's loud snoring from his room. I brushed it off as my tired brain playing tricks on me. But 2 nights later, Sarah heard it. She came into the kitchen the next morning, looking pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She told us that someone had been scratching at her door all night. Not knocking, scratching, like a dog trying to get in. But we didn't have a dog. The breaking point for the first house happened on a Tuesday. We were all in the living room watching a movie. The house was quiet. Suddenly, from the basement, a place we used only for storage and laundry, we heard a massive crash, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps running up the wooden stairs. Thump, thump, thump. The footsteps stopped right at the basement door, which was in the kitchen. We all froze. Tyler grabbed a baseball bat, and I grabbed my phone to dial 911. We stared at the door handle, waiting for it to turn. We waited for 5 agonizing minutes, but it never moved. When the police arrived and searched the basement, they found nothing. No intruder, no broken windows. But all of our stored boxes had been thrown into a pile in the center of the room, forming a perfect pyramid. We broke the lease the next day. We were terrified, convinced the house was haunted. We scrambled to find a new place and ended up in a modern apartment complex on the other side of town. It was a sterile, new-build unit on the 3rd floor. No history, no creepy basement, just clean white walls and security cameras. We thought we were safe. We joked about the Burnside ghost as we unpacked our boxes in the new place. We thought leaving the physical location meant leaving the problem behind. We were wrong. The activity in the new apartment didn't start gradually like before. It started immediately, and it was aggressive. On our second night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was coming from the vents. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was angry, urgent, and hissed. I sat up, my heart pounding against my ribs, and the whispering stopped abruptly. The next morning, Tyler asked if I had been walking around the apartment at night. I told him no. He looked at me, his face devoid of color, and said, "I saw you." He explained that around 3 a.m. he had gotten up to get water. He saw me standing in the living room, facing the corner, my forehead pressed against the wall. He said he called my name and I didn't move. I just stood there, swaying slightly. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Tyler, I was asleep. I swear." We started noticing objects moving. Not just small things like keys or remotes. I'm talking about kitchen chairs being stacked on top of the dining table while we were sleeping. We set up a camera in the living room to catch whoever was doing it. We reviewed the footage the next morning. What we saw made us pack our bags again. At 3:17 a.m., the camera captured a shadow. It wasn't a person. It looked like a dense black mass of static that seeped out of my bedroom door. It moved across the floor, not walking but gliding. It circled the table for an hour, just swirling around it. Then it stopped and looked directly into the camera lens. The feed distorted. Static overtook the screen and the camera turned off. But the worst part wasn't the video. It was the realization. In the footage, right before the camera cut out, the shadow seemed to reach out towards a box on the counter. It was a box of old books I had bought at a garage sale right before we moved into the first house. I remembered the day I bought them. An estate sale. The owner had looked so relieved to get rid of them. I hadn't thought much of it. I realized then that we hadn't moved into a haunted house. We had brought the haunting with us. I grabbed the box of books, ran down to the dumpster behind the complex, and threw them in. I poured lighter fluid on them and set them on fire. I didn't care if it was illegal. I just wanted them gone. As the flames consumed the old leather covers, I swear I heard a high-pitched screaming sound, like a tea kettle whistling, coming from the fire. We moved out of that apartment a week later. The group drifted apart after that. We couldn't look at each other without remembering the fear. I live alone now, in a different state. I haven't experienced anything major since burning the books. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I hear it. 3 polite knocks. Knock, knock, knock. It's faint, coming from inside my closet. I never open it. I just turn up the TV volume and pretend I can't hear the scratching that follows, praying that whatever I invited into my life hasn't found me again. Because deep down, I know that some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. My name is Mark, and I've been married to my wife Elena for 5 years. We live in a quiet suburb just outside of Seattle. Our house isn't old or creepy. It's a standard 2-story build from the early 2000s. Beige walls, carpeted floors, completely ordinary. Elena is the most rational person I know. She's a data analyst, someone who finds comfort in numbers and logic. She doesn't believe in ghosts, doesn't watch horror movies, and laughs at my superstitions. That's why what happened last month shook me to my core. It started on our 3rd wedding anniversary. We were having dinner at home. The mood was light, the wine was good. Then, out of nowhere, Elena put her fork down. Her hand was shaking. "Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I need to tell you something. I've been keeping it from you for 3 years." My stomach dropped. My mind instantly raced to the worst-case scenarios. An affair, a hidden debt, a terminal illness. "I hear things," she continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "In this house, when you're at work, when you're asleep, I hear footsteps." I blinked, confused. Footsteps? Like a burglar? She shook her head violently. "No, it's heavy. It walks from the guest room to our bedroom door every single day at 10:15 a.m. And sometimes at night, I hear sighing right next to my ear. It sounds exhausted, like someone carrying a heavy weight." I didn't know how to react. Part of me wanted to laugh in relief that she wasn't leaving me, but seeing the terror in her eyes stopped me. She told me she hadn't said anything because she didn't want me to think she was crazy. She had been living with this secret terror for 3 years, suffering in silence to protect our normal life. I promised her I would investigate. I'm a skeptic, but I'm also a problem solver. I checked the pipes, the attic, the foundation. Nothing. The house was solid. 2 days later, I decided to work from home without telling her, just to see if I could hear what she heard. Elena left for her office at 8 a.m. I sat in the kitchen, laptop open, waiting. At 10:15 a.m. exactly, I heard it. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't subtle. It sounded like someone wearing heavy work boots walking across the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway. My blood ran cold. I grabbed a baseball bat and sprinted up the stairs. "Who's there?" I shouted. The hallway was empty. The guest room door was open, just as we left it. The sound had stopped the moment I hit the first step. I searched every closet, under the beds, even the attic crawl space. Nothing. That night, I didn't tell Elena I had heard it too. I didn't want to validate her fear just yet. I wanted proof. So I bought a high-end baby monitor and a motion-activated camera. I hid the camera on top of the bookshelf in the hallway and put the baby monitor receiver on my nightstand. For a week, nothing happened on the camera. But the nights changed. I started waking up at 3 a.m., feeling an intense cold spot right next to me in bed. Elena would be fast asleep, breathing rhythmically, but the air above her felt frozen. And then, through the baby monitor I had set to high sensitivity, I heard it. A sigh. It was long, drawn out, and undeniably male. It didn't come from the hallway. It came from inside our bedroom. I jolted up, turning on the lamp. Elena woke up, startled. "What? What is it?" "I heard it," I whispered. "The sigh." She went pale. "You heard it?" "Yes, it was right here." We didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I checked the camera footage. There was nothing visual. No shadow figures, no orbs. But the audio was corrupted. At exactly 3 a.m., the sound on the recording turned into a high-pitched screeching noise that lasted for 10 seconds. I decided we needed to leave. I told Elena we were going to stay at a hotel for a few days. She agreed instantly. We packed our bags. As I was loading the car, I realized I had left my wallet on the nightstand. I ran back upstairs. The house was dead quiet. I grabbed my wallet and turned to leave. That's when I saw it. On the floor, right next to Elena's side of the bed, the carpet was pressed down. You know how heavy furniture leaves indentations in the carpet? There were 2 distinct depressions, shaped like large feet pressed deep into the plush rug. As I watched, the carpet fibers slowly began to rise back up, as if someone had just stepped away. I froze. I couldn't move. My eyes followed the invisible path. The carpet depressed again, a step closer to me. Then another. Crunch. The sound of carpet padding compressing under immense weight. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted out of the room, down the stairs, and into the car. I peeled out of the driveway like a madman. We stayed at the hotel for a week. During that time, I did some deep research on the property. I went to the county archives, looked up old police reports. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Our house wasn't built on an old cemetery or anything cliché, but the land it sat on used to be part of a larger farm in the 1950s. The owner was a man named Arthur. He was a recluse. Neighbors reported he would spend hours pacing his property, sighing loudly, talking to himself. One day, Arthur disappeared. Police searched the farm but never found him. They assumed he skipped town. But here's the detail that haunts me. In the archived police report, there was a note about a hidden cellar discovered on the property years later, right around where our foundation was dug. Inside the cellar, they found a chair and a pair of heavy work boots. The boots were positioned in front of the chair, as if someone had just taken them off. They never found Arthur's body. We sold the house 2 months ago. We took a massive loss on it, but I didn't care. We moved to a condo in the city on the 20th floor. No attic, no basement, no old land. Elena seems happier. She says she doesn't hear the footsteps anymore. But I have a secret now, one I've been keeping from her for 2 months. Last night, while Elena was in the shower, I was sitting in our new living room. It was 10:15 p.m. I heard a sigh. It wasn't from the hallway. It was from the baby monitor I had packed in a box which was sitting in the corner of the room. The monitor wasn't even plugged in. And this time, the sigh was followed by a whisper. A gruff, tired voice that sounded like it was right next to my ear. "Found you." I haven't told Elena. I don't want to ruin the peace she thinks we finally have. But I know now that it wasn't the house that was haunted. It was us. Or maybe it was just her. And I'm merely the collateral damage in whatever attachment she picked up 3 years ago. For now, I just turn up the TV volume and pretend I don't see the indentations appearing on our new sofa when no one is sitting there.